Welcome to DIA Today, Democracy in America Today. I'm Matt Parks alongside Dave Corbin. Glad to have you with us to explore the ideas behind today's headlines.
My left eye sees pollution. Those dirty fuels are burning. The earth's whole climate's churning. Clean energy solution. My right eye scans the bill. Fossil fuels are cheap. Wind and solar too steep. Drill, baby, drill. Predefined, misaligned, polarized division. Shuttered mind, worse than blind. 2020 vision.
Hey Dave, how you doing?
Good. End of the semester, which is kind of a neat thing to say. Back in university world, we had our commencement last Friday, so I had to put the garbs on, look all regal.
Very nice.
We had actually two ceremonies, but it was neat. Colorado Christian has a large online program that has about 10,000 students in it, all across the country, and about 1,000 of them flew out for their ceremony. And then we have the kind of traditional student ceremony as well in the afternoon. A lot of time on stage. So doing nothing, just, a lot of people come up to me. Just sweat. Yeah, just great job sitting down and sweating.
Yeah, that's fun. Well, we're in the middle of the end of year programs as well, kind of middle school, high school stuff that we're involved in. It's like every night you're out for something different. It's, a lot of good stuff, but that unfortunately or fortunately, they never conflict. So you never like, oh, would love to, but can't, because for some reason this one's on Monday and the next one's on Tuesday, and Wednesday is also booked for this one. So it's every night. But anyway, we're not saying no to anything, but we are getting a little rundown.
Yeah, there are a lot of these ceremonies. We had actually a couple school celebrations the day before that were neat. We have a nursing program here, so there's a pinning ceremony, and then we had the education program also had a ceremony. But it's neat to do that at a Christian university because to be a nurse is an honorable profession, or a teacher. To do so kind of with the foundation of your belief in Christ is just something different. It changes the way you look at the role of the teacher or the role of the healer, right? That's those are special.
That's great. Yeah. My oldest daughter's got a friend graduating from nursing school this evening, and we're taking her out to be at the ceremony. So that'll be fun.
Excellent. Good stuff.
Yeah. Well, so last time, 3 weeks ago, we needed an extra week to get ready for this one. Sometimes the schedules just don't work. But last time we were looking at three key documents from the summer of 1775 as the Second Continental Congress got going and meeting after the beginning of the Revolutionary War. So, of course, April 19th, 1775, we have Lexington and Concord. Then in June, we have Bunker Hill. And so as they gather in Philadelphia in the summer of 75, the question is, what are we doing? What's the trajectory of all this? And why are we doing it? And so they put together several documents. The one that we focused on the most was the causes and necessity of taking up arms, which was their defense of the military effort that they were organizing. They had appointed Washington to be the commander-in-chief of the military, and they were recruiting the militia and organizing the militia and getting people ready to fight in the field for some indefinite period of time. We also looked at the Olive Branch Petition, which was approved the day before that, which was one last appeal to the king. And then we saw the king's implicit response a month and a half later, as he says, you are a bunch of rebels. And therefore, anybody who is sympathetic, really in the least way, with the American cause is a traitor. And so really requiring Americans and British subjects, for that matter, some of whom had been sympathetic to the American side, to decide which side are you on and to draw a sharp line there. So as things unfold, by the end of the summer of 1775, Washington is on the scene organizing his army. He's trying to keep the British military hemmed in Boston, and so there's kind of a stalemate there for a number of months. But meanwhile, there's efforts to conquer Quebec that are underway, and the beginnings of some conflict in Virginia and South Carolina. So it's a relatively quiet time for the war, and this is a period during which Americans are thinking, Again, what are we fighting for? Is this a war that can end with reconciliation somehow? Are we going to fight our way to a proper place within the empire? And in the midst of all that, Thomas Paine, who had been sent over essentially to America to seek his fortune by Franklin in 1774 with a nice letter of introduction, who's adopted the American cause as his own almost upon his arrival there, publishes the work Common Sense, which is a runaway bestseller for its time, just copies upon copies, people reading dog-eared copies in the local taverns and passing them around and all the rest. And it creates quite a sensation. This is January of 1776 when he first publishes the pamphlet or short book and publishes a second edition in the middle of February with some responses to some objections that have been raised to the first edition. So that's the edition most people read today. It's an appendix that responds to some of those concerns. But the heart of the argument is basically common sense dictates we fight for independence and not to remain within the empire. So this is really meant to give an impetus toward those that are pushing for independence as the war aim. And really there's a call for a document like the Declaration of Independence, which of course will arrive 6 months or so later. So before we get into the document, just briefly outline what he's doing here. It's maybe 40, 50, 60 pages, depending on the edition. So we're not going to go through all of it, obviously. But want to give just a brief sketch of the argument that he lays out, and then Dave invite you to help guide us through the text, the parts that we're going to focus on. So the first part is where he really takes up the general theory of government and the English Constitution. So it's his most sort of political, philosophical section. He argues that the problems with the British government are inherent to that government, that there's not really a quick fix there. There's not just a matter of, well, if they would just give us the right number of seats or that kind of thing, that there's a fundamental issue there in the way that the British government is constructed that can't be overcome by piecemeal reforms. Second section focuses on monarch and hereditary succession, and there Paine makes sort of a classic argument against monarchy per se. He goes back to 1 Samuel chapter 8 and all the things that are said against monarchy there. He tries to construct a case that says, look, this is just wrong. As a regime type, there's something fundamentally wrong about monarchy. And then he applies that in the last two sections, which will be our focus, in what he calls his thoughts on the present state of American affairs, which is the longest section where he discusses American relations with Britain and shows that anything short of independence won't really work as a solution to our problems. And then the last part for the perhaps persuaded but still worried reader, he says, look, there's enough resources here to get the job done. So it's called The Present Ability of America, where he emphasizes the possibility of actual victory in this war. No one wants to join a losing cause. No one wants to throw away their life or their property for independence that can't actually be achieved. And so he wants to persuade those who are otherwise convinced by the argument to this point that this is actually an achievable result. We can actually secure independence and our rightful place in the world.
Yeah, Paine's a really interesting individual in that not only will he participate in the American Revolution, but later on he writes The Rights of Man and has some participation in the French Revolution as well, and gets himself in trouble there. Yep. I was reading up on him, and James Monroe had helped get him released. But I think that the main thing, as you were saying and outlining the beginning of Common Sense, is a metaphysical shift that Paine makes in his orientation to all subjects, not just simply politics, but to all subjects. And you see that in his section, Thoughts on the Present State of American Affairs. In the following pages, I offer nothing more than simple facts, plain arguments, and common sense. And of course, here, Matt, we're reminded of that turn toward empiricism that is happening across kind of the intellectual history of Europe and the United States, a dependence on the thought of empiricists like Locke, who say, if you want to understand something, just look at it, look at the facts of the matter, make plain arguments, appeal to common sense, because common sense is just that. We all have it. and we all can see things as they are. And it's really difficult in the year 2026 to understand just how much of a metaphysical, how much of an epistemological shift that is when you're moving toward common sense. Because here you see very clearly that a lot of people might be oriented to think about things, especially politics, not from the standpoint of facts, but from the standpoint of tradition, from the standpoint of ancient loyalties, from the standpoint of what had come in the past, that things are just done a certain way, and they've been done a certain way for 500, 600, 700 years. And the fact that they've been done that way makes them right. What do you make of that metaphysical shift, Matt, here at the beginning?
Yeah, that's a great observation and is really important from the standpoint of trying to have a fresh look at events. So while he wants to bring in our common sense in the broad sense, and the Scottish Enlightenment common sense philosophy is very current in this day, David Hume and others, but also bring it right down to the ground here in this discussion. So he's going to have to reframe things. Americans are used to, for 150 years, being a British colony. And whether that's always been pleasant and easy or not, that's still the tradition. That's, as you're saying, that's the received way of doing things. And so what he has to do is kind of break free from that and break through all those assumptions that they have about how things have to go, and maybe the story they've been telling for all those years about how this relationship came to be and the benefits that come from it. And he's going to be puncturing balloons one after another and saying, look, that's not really what's happened here, or that's not really the situation. And if you can have a kind of clear-eyed view of the facts on the ground without those presuppositions and assumptions that you're bringing in from the past history, then with fresh eyes, we can see that a possibility here that Americans, even a year or two before, would have never even thought of.
Let's go through some of these assumptions. I mean, the first assumption that could very well have been on the mind of many Americans is that you're wealthy, you flourished because of your connection with Great Britain. And you'll only be wealthy in the future if you continue to be connected with Great Britain. Paine here argues America would have flourished as much and probably much more had no European power had anything to do with her. That's an interesting argument, Matt. Certainly, a lot of work goes into the settlement of North America, but we had just 13 years prior come out of a French and Indian War, where joining in arms with the British, we were able to better secure ourselves. So it may be a little bit of a stretch, maybe more than a little bit of a stretch, for Paine to argue this, but Paine is trying to just emphasize, listen, you've got this. You'll continue to work hard. You'll continue to work the land. You'll have your farms.
Right.
You'll do that, all that, and you won't be taxed by people who don't represent you. So don't fear. Your commerce will still be intact after you declare your independence. And the second assumption, very much tied to the first, is you've only been able to flourish to the degree that you've been protected by Great Britain. Paine writes, but she hath protected us, say some. That she hath engrossed us is true, and defended the continent at our expense as well as her own is admitted. And she would have defended Turkey from the same motive, vis-a-vis the sake of trade and dominion. So don't be clueless on this point. Her defense, Great Britain's defense of the colonies, was not in the interest of the colonies, but in the interest of Great Britain. So once again, this kind of appeal, right, to the passions of the colonials in looking at things that matter to them. Money matters to them. Wealth matters to them. Commerce matters to them. Safety matters to them. And turning the argument to say, well, no, you're not safe because of Great Britain. You're safe if you take up arms in your own defense. And I think the final assumption that he takes up here, Matt, is one that has to do with loyalty.
Mm-hmm.
Paine writes, but Britain is the parent country, say some, and the more shame upon her conduct. Even brutes do not devour their young, nor savages make war upon their families. wherefore the assertion, if true, turns her to reproach. But it happens not to be true, or only partly so. And the phrase parent or mother country hath been Jesuitically adopted by the king and his parasites, with a low papistical design of gaining an unfair bias on the credulous weakness of our minds. Kind of see a little bit of the craft of his writing as well.
Right.
Europe, and not England, is the parent country of America. This new world hath been the asylum for the persecuted lovers of civil and religious liberty from every part of Europe. So really just separating that England is not your parent, right? England is not your mother country. What do you make of his rebuttal of these three assumptions and the language and the argument itself, Matt?
Yeah, well, let's start with the language. I mean, he's a rhetorical master. Obviously, he's playing on anti-Catholic prejudice there in the language that you were just reading, making reference to the Jesuits and the Pope or the Papist. So, yeah, he's going to play all those strings. He he knows who he's writing to and the prejudices that he can appeal to for his own purposes. But yeah, I think what he's trying to do is tell an alternate story here. And in some ways, it's similar to the story that Jefferson was telling in his summary view of the rights of British America. Americans came over freely. They established themselves really at their own expense, with their own effort, and they have useful goods. Why are they in conflict with France? Why do we need Britain to help us with French and Indian War? Well, because we're tied to Britain. If we weren't part of the British Empire, there would be no conflict with France. France is happy to trade with us. We have no beef with France apart from Britain. And so he recasts the whole story and the whole relationship and say, well, look, this isn't about this support that the British have given to America. It's the fact that the British have had to clean up things from their conflict with France over in Europe in the Americas. And so we've been those who've been harmed by that relationship, harmed by those rivalries, not benefited from those things. And so if we were on our own, we could trade freely with Britain or France or whoever would take our goods. And of course, this is really speaking to the Americans from the previous decade or so, all the restrictions on their trade that have been at the center of some of their complaints toward the British Parliament to say, yeah, we don't have to trade with Britain if they don't want our goods, or France. There's Spain. There's a big wide world. And we have lots of things that are attractive and useful. And so why not stand out on our own and establish our place in the world on free terms with whoever's willing to work with us?
Yeah, you caught on something, Matt, that I think is crucial here, and that is his use of religious language and his reference to the Almighty, his reference to the design of heaven, and his constant use of the first person plural, we, are.
Yeah.
That now Paine had just moved to America in 1774, brought over by Ben Franklin. But he's writing as if he's been an American, for 10, 15, 20, 25 years.
Yep.
So really interesting that he employs quite a few rhetorical devices in order to get his point across. Let me read I think the main sections of his reference to religion. Everything that is right or natural pleads for separation. The blood of the slain, the weeping voice of nature cries, quote, "'Tis time to part, even the distance at which the Almighty hath placed England and America, is a strong and natural proof that the authority of the one over the other was never the design of heaven." So geographically, God has made the world so this separation occurs. And then he says later in the same paragraph, and it's interesting that he ties these two things together, the Reformation was preceded by the discovery of America, as if the Almighty graciously meant to open a sanctuary to the persecuted in future years, when home should afford neither friendship nor safety. So his argument here is that it's providential that America comes into being and becomes independent on its own. And it was always God's plan, much like the Reformation, for this to happen. Very, very, very interesting use. And as you said, kind of an anti-Catholic fervor and within much of the colonies. And this would be very appealing to these same people. So
yeah,
I want to move further on into his argument, though, because I think that one of the arguments, one of the assumptions that he takes up and he gives some credence to, and it actually is a really good question for the Americans, is, okay, say you declare your independence, what happens thereafter? How, after one revolution, do you stop a cycle of revolutions so that you have one revolution, another, and you end up in anarchy? He writes, the most powerful of all arguments is that nothing but independence, a continental form of government, can keep the peace of the continent and preserve it inviolate from civil wars. I dread the event of a reconciliation with Britain now, as is more than probable that it will be followed by a revolt somewhere or other, the consequences of which may be far more fatal than all the malice of Britain. Now, of course, Matt, this is 1775. It's not going to be more than, 85 years until the Americans are engaged in a civil war.
Yeah.
So there's nothing saying that once they declare their independence, that independence is going to mean peace, prosperity, and union. So what do you make of his drawing attention to this argument, and why is it important for the Americans at the time?
Right. I think this is one of the things that he does emphasize a number of points is the timeliness of the effort. He sees that there's unity at the moment. We've talked about this at a number of points where there were opportunities for perhaps an interested colony to look at Boston and say, you know what, you've really gone too far. We don't need to suffer for your sake. Why is your cause our cause? And while that hadn't been the case through two continental congresses up until this point, there was no reason why that unity had to last. We've seen that in democratic peoples over and over again. The fervor of the initial conflict and the rally around the flag design and desire is often very quickly displaced by more parochial concerns and interests. And so would we expect something different on American soil? How long will New York be willing to suffer for the sake of Boston? How long will Philadelphia be willing to take on the extra burdens that are required of her for the sake of a cause that seems somewhat geographically distant from her, at least at this point in time? So this is a very reasonable concern that Paine is raising. And if you want to have an independent country, what he's saying is strike while the iron is hot. Strike while you have that unity. Strike while you have that patriotic fervor. That's not going to last. And that may very well be replaced not just by a coolness one toward another, but then all of a sudden the conflicting interests begin to surface. And you realize we've got some regional rivalries here. We've got some local colony state rivalries here that could lead to conflict. And so very quickly, that measure of patriotic unity that we have right now could lead to real division and internal fighting rather than fighting against a foreign enemy.
And he adds to that you needn't worry too much about union, and that you have a couple things going for you. He says, but where, says some, is the King of America? I'll tell you, friend, he reigns above. So we have a king in heaven. So once again, the use of religious language that will keep us together. He also mentions that beyond a monarchy or not having a monarchy, what is key in America is that the law is king. So religion will help hold it together. Our lawfulness will help hold it together. And by the way, our recognition that having a government of our own is our natural right will hold us together. So all of those things, all of those ideas, all of those themes of morality, law, religion, natural right, those things in and of themselves will allow us to be a strong country. But we also have great material strength. We have the ability in our present numbers to become a nation that can defend itself. And these are, I mean, once again, these are arguments that Paine is making that they're kind of questionable whether those things are going to hold us together. Would you agree?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think he's making a strong rhetorical case. He's a great writer, and he knows again the things that will appeal to his readers and his audience. I mean, we know his own religious views are anything but orthodox, but he's going to speak in ways that Orthodox Christians are going to understand and respond to probably. And yeah, I mean, I think this is putting the best face on the situation. But I think at this point, it's still a very reasonable question to ask. Well, what's the alternative? Right? If you're going to fight for something other than independence, how's that going to work? What are the practical alternatives that are really available to you in that context? And so I think where Paine's argument sometimes is a bit tendentious or, look over here and ignore this over there. Nevertheless, I think he has rhetorically a strong position insofar as the alternative is very difficult to understand and to defend and to present as a pathway to some kind of reasonable accommodation and good life for the American people moving forward.
Yeah, and this goes to his last argument as well, and we can see this, and we're in commencement season, as we mentioned at the top of the show. This appeal, right, to youthfulness, to new frontiers, right? He said, don't think that the fact that you're a young nation or will be a young nation is a bad thing, right? Recognize that if you are a young nation, you have the ability to determine what your adolescence and your young adulthood looks like. But almost as if he was, talking to a teenager, saying, "You can do this. You can go out into the world on your own, and you have the ability to become a young man or a young woman." So that kind of is an interesting close to this argument.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end, you see, a set of declarations. What does he say that we ought to declare here, Matt?
Well, he basically thinks it's time for America to assert as her war aim independence and to give reasons for that, but just the kind of thing that happens in the Declaration of Independence, and to open up thereby the possibility of acquiring alliances. As he points out at some length, it's really impossible for France or Spain or anybody else who might otherwise be inclined to oppose the British and therefore side with the American colonists to do so while it looks like it's just a civil war. It's not their business, and there's no benefit. If America is fighting to regain her standing in the British Empire to strengthen the empire in the long run by keeping America part of it, why is that good for France? Why is that good for Spain? But as soon as America says we're fighting for independence from Great Britain to weaken the empire from the perspective of France or Spain, then all of a sudden they have a reason to join the fight. And so Paine says, look, that's what needs to happen. Americans will rally around that and be able to rally others to that cause in support of their independence.
All right. So to summarize, I think at least five key lines of Paine's argument. Number one, there's no going back for more. There's nothing we can do to restore the prior relationship. Number two, we know no loyalty or gratitude to Britain. What they did because it was in their own interest. Number three, we have, as Americans, all the resources we need to be able to become our own independent country. Number four, and you mentioned this, if we delay when we have this opportunity, that delaying of our independence might allow for rivalries to develop and might allow for conflict and might open the room for some tyrant to come in and rule over us. But now, fifthly, when we are together, when we see what our rights are, and we see that law should rule, we shouldn't be ruled by a British king, now is the time to, as you just mentioned, tell the nations of the world what we're doing, why we're doing it, and to really institute ourselves as an independent nation based upon sufficient and good reasons for doing so. So when you look at this argument, right, of course, he's writing in 1775, and if you were to apply it to, as we often have in the series, to our contemporary political setting, how does Paine, how is Paine, I should say, helpful in understanding where we currently are, the issues, divisiveness, the faction that's present within American politics, and what might a Paine argue today as to our current state of affairs?
Well, I think there's several ways we can go with that. I'd just maybe suggest one, and maybe we can add a few others as we go along. But, obviously one of the big movements on the left right now is no kings. And Paine's with you on no kings. But he also warns about demagogues. And one of the figures that's kind of faded in terms of history is this Italian fellow from Naples, Masaniello, who briefly, as in 10 days, led a revolt in Naples in 1647, end of the 30 Years' War. And he was a fisherman, organized resistance to the local government in conjunction with the rule of the Spanish over Italy at that point. Now we would talk about a Robespierre, or we've got other figures, right, who are more symbolic of that fervor. And I guess he's a relatively minor rebel from the perspective of what's happened since. But I think it's a nice example because here's somebody who stirs up the crowd, tries to control the mob, but is really focused so much on the immediate. And in consequence of that, his rise and fall happens again in the space of 10 days. This is where we're at right now in terms of our politics. We're not quite down to the 10-day cycle, but we're pretty close. There's this sort of eschatological fever that seems to have just taken over American politics in the last 10 years. I go back to the Flight 93 election essay right before Trump's election in 2016, and overlook the character of Trump, overlook the flaws and faults, because this is our last chance to save America. And Trump wins, but then 4 years later, it's the last chance to save America from Trump, or maybe it's the last chance to save America from the left who will take over if Trump leaves. And then 4 years after that, it's the exact same thing. And now here we are, and all of a sudden, midterm elections are eschatological events, right? So we've got all kinds of efforts, state by state, to redistrict and try to squeeze an extra House seat or two out of this particular state. And now Virginia made their effort to do that, and crazy maps in order to get 10 Democrats and only one Republican. The state Supreme Court strikes that down. U.S. Supreme Court strikes down racial gerrymandering. We've got people on the left just casually saying, well, when we get control of the Congress again, we're going to add 4 new justices, so get ourselves a nice 7-6 majority, and we're going to maybe lower the retirement age for Virginia Supreme Court down to 54, so we can get rid of all of them and replace them all with people that'll affirm this plan. I mean, this is crazy stuff. This is like end of a republic sort of thing, and it's back and forth and back and forth. The expectation that the very next event, whatever that event is going to be the last chance to either save our democracy, as the left puts it, or save the American way. And I guess you wonder, can the fever break before we really break something for good? Up until this point, the various guardrails have been transgressed, but we haven't done away with the Supreme Court yet. But I mean, we're talking about that, right? That's on the offing in 2028. That's maybe on the ballot in 2028. And so by talking about those great dangers and ratcheting up the rhetoric every time, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, you're creating a situation where the Republic really is on the ballot. The Constitution really is on the ballot if we're going to take some of these claims and design seriously.
I think another thing that Paine's work and project makes me think of is something that's actually been compared to Paine's common sense, and that is our mentor, Angelo Codevilla's work from 2010, titled The Ruling Class.
Yeah.
And both works and both projects, beg the question, albeit in different contexts, whether a free people can govern itself, or whether power inevitably consolidates in the hand of an elite or in a mob, detached from the lives and affections of ordinary citizens. And it's interesting, right, that they're both kind of making a revolutionary call. Both authors, Paine and Codevilla, are making a revolutionary call, but they're different in a way as well, because whereas for Paine, you have to question, right, whether he is truly an adherent to Christianity. I think we know from his later writings that he's not.
Yeah.
Whereas Codevilla very much argues, right, from the standpoint of the Judeo-Christian tradition, and what the roots of the American political order were, and how they kind of bleed into American lowercase r republicanism. But I think another interesting comparison between the two works is that they both point to a different enemy. For Paine, right, the issue is that you've got a king, a set of aristocrats who have ruled for hundreds of years and have established customs and traditions that have gone unquestioned. Whereas for Codevilla, 200 years later, after the development of the American administrative state. The group that he's pointing to as the problem is kind of a administrative oligarchy that now has control over the country, over our universities, over our corporations, and our media institutions. So the enemy for Codevilla is different than the enemy for Paine. And I think that the peace that Codevilla calls for is one grounded in Republican liberty and grounded in the necessity that citizens possess the virtue and courage necessary to resist centralized and in some cases unlawful authority. Now that's easier said than done, Matt, because Republican liberty can go a couple different ways. Republican liberty can go in the way that you just mentioned, where you're like, okay, well, we're free. We're free to disband the Supreme Court. We're free to disband things that we don't like. And Codevilla is very cautious on this point that, all right, you want to overcome an administrative aristocracy. That's one thing. But in overcoming it, you only overcome it well and peacefully if you as citizens begin to re-energize the government along its initial founding principles. And it doesn't seem like many people are willing to do that in the year 2026.
Yeah, that's the real challenge. I mean, in both cases, you're talking about rule by a distant and in some ways disinterested elite. And across 3,000 miles of ocean in 1775, 1776, or across the digital divide, perhaps in 2026, the question is, are the people of the United States prepared to take up the responsibilities of self-government? They're clearly dissatisfied. They were dissatisfied in 1776. They're dissatisfied today. I mean, how many years has it been since the general state of the country has been seen as positive? I mean, that number is always underwater. How long has it been since Congress had a positive approval rating? Has it ever happened? I can't even remember that. And even the presidents, right? Usually a little bump at the beginning of a new administration, but after that, it's 38%, 42% approval. So there's clearly this ongoing dissatisfaction with elite. And it doesn't matter if it's an R or a D or a blue or a red. It goes back and forth every 2 years, every 4 years, and there's still no solution. So there's clearly a dissatisfaction. But yeah, the question is, what do we do with that? And are we willing to take on the burdens as well as the blessings of self-government and have something of a longer horizon for our actions than the next election or the next day's headlines for that matter? This is the short-sightedness that really, I think, threatens our institutions most fundamentally. I mean, it's ironic. Here we're going through this semi-quincentennial celebration, and we're naturally casting our eyes back across a quarter of a millennium, but all we can really focus on is what's right in front of our eyes. And we can't see, well, how are we going to make it another quarter millennium? No one cares about that. How are we having another decade at the current pace that we're on? That would be a good question. No one seems to really care much about that. So can there be injected into our public discourse, maybe even by these events of recounting past stories in this past history, some sense of perspective that allows us to look beyond the immediate and make decisions that are actually in the interest of the republic and the people and the generations to come, and not merely in our own immediate and most narrowly defined self-interest?
Yeah, I mean, that's well said. And I think that's kind of where we're at right now. And boy, these upcoming months, this election in 2026, of course, you want your side to win, but you want the process to win.
Yeah.
You want the belief in the process to win. And I think that's what we all should be hoping for, because only with that will we get back to the habits, right, of Republican people and the trust, right, in Republican governance. It's liberty, but it's ordered liberty, and the order matters as much as the liberty. All right, we had to do this, Matt. We had to finish with the Tocqueville crystal ball. That's maybe why we saved 2 weeks to 3 weeks before we met again. Excuse me, and our NBA playoff picks were just awful. Awful is the right word to use. I said it would be the Nuggets and Boston, and both the Nuggets and the Celtics were defeated uh, very early in the
in the
playoffs.
first
So I'm
round.
first round. I'm done. I mean, my NBA picks are up. You still have the Spurs, right? And you
Yeah.
still have Cleveland. So
I-
you're gonna do much better than I. But
I've got a few alive. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, this
plus,
is really remarkable. I mean, you don't normally lose favorites in the first round, right? I mean, the NBA is pretty chalk until you get to the conference finals. Maybe there's a little bit of a surprise there, but this year, no, it's been and there were some good matchups. I mean, to be fair, I mean there were some, really tough 2-7, 3-6, 4-5 kind of series as you laid them out there. But even so, it's surprising to see how many of the teams you expected to be there just fell first round.
you'll note that about 6 months ago, at the beginning of the NBA season, I picked the Knicks to win it all, which is hard for me to do since I don't like any New York team. But when I had a closer opportunity to the NBA Finals to choose finalists, I performed poorly. So we're going to go back to golf. I
Yes.
seem to have better luck with golf than any other sport, which is odd because I just don't know much about golf. I think whenever you put a golf fulfill crystal ball in there, it's to your advantage. So the PGA Championship
Yep.
this weekend.
Has teed off.
So we're gonna pick the winner.
Yep.
We're gonna pick how many of the 20 club professionals who are allowed to play will make the cut, and how many of the 11 LIV golfers will make the cut. So, who's your winner in this weekend's PGA Championship, Matt?
All right. Well, I'm going back to my original Masters pick, Matt Fitzpatrick. I think he's going to get the job done. He and his brother won a team competition a few weeks ago, which got his brother a PGA card for the next year, which was kind of a neat story. And so I think that momentum carries him forward all the way to the championship here.
I'm going to play it as safe as you can play it. I'm predicting Scotty Scheffler wins. It's but anytime there's a golf tournament, we do this. I'm going to just
Yeah.
predict Scheffler. So
Well, I mean, you're going to be right half the time, and the other
exactly,
half he's going to come in second or third. So,
exactly. He's that consistent. Yeah, it's
yeah,
pretty wild.
yeah.
All right,
So,
how many of the club professionals do you think make the cut?
yeah, this is one of the neat features of the PGA because it's PGA of America. They allow some of their local club pros in, 20 of them every year. And there's some of them that are pretty good. There's one guy that's made the cut, or been in, I should say, 8 times, finished as high as 15th. But most of them, of course, will be cut. And it's, over half the participants are cut after the second round. So I'm going to say 3 of the 20 make it through, Dave.
I'm going to say two. So I'm going to say 10% of them make it through. But
Okay.
I do think it's a neat thing they allow those club professionals to golf with these superstars
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
club professionals are pretty darn good themselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. And they're doing all the work, teaching everybody, patient with all of us with our terrible swings and habits. And so, yeah, it's nice that they get a little moment in the sun.
How many of the 11 LIV golfers do you think will make the cut?
That's a good question. There's some good players there. I think it's hurt them leaving the PGA Tour. I don't think any of them have performed as well in the majors as they probably would have had they stayed in the PGA Tour. But making the cut for some of these guys is a pretty low bar. So I'm going to say 5 of the 11 get through.
I'm going to say three: DeChambeau, Dustin Johnson, and John Rahm. So
Okay. Yep.
those are some name golfers that they've been on top of their game at points. So I'm going to go with three there.
Yeah, 3 guys with a
We
pretty good track record in majors as well. So that's not a bad
exactly.
choice.
So we shall see.
Yep. Well, very good. Well, we continue our march toward July 4th, 1776 and July 4th, 2026. Next time we'll be coming back with some thoughts on government from John Adams. So once you're independent, what do you do? Thinking about the colonies first, and then of course we'll get to the point of discussing developments for the national government that will have to follow the Declaration of Independence itself. But in the meantime, feel free to reach out to us at democracyinamerica@gmail.com. You can also follow us on YouTube and Instagram. And we'll look forward to talking to you again real soon.